All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, folks, to eLearning Uncovered's free webinar, Designing with Animation for eLearning. My name is Tim Slade, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first question I have is, what is animation? When you think about animation, movement, how do you actually define what animation is? And this is a topic that I've researched quite a bit over the past couple of years, because animation is something that, for myself, I realized that I've incorporated quite a bit into my own e-learning design, and I've seen other ways people have incorporated it into their design, and it's something that animation is something that I've noticed can be very subtle. It's something you incorporate very subtly, and it's something that, when done properly, can really help enhance your learning content. So you think about what is animation, most people say it's movement. But one of the things that I've discovered is that animation, when you think about what animation is, it shares this really common space with storytelling. And you think about the way we use movement or animation to convey some sort of meaning that might otherwise have to be conveyed or explained with words. And the use of movement in animation goes back pretty far in our history. If you think about, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, when there were cave drawings on walls in these caves of showing, everyday life, or showing the way, these cavemen hunted. Although they didn't move because they were cave drawings, it did show a sense of movement. It told a story of movement through the way those different petroglyphs or hieroglyphs were carved into the stone. And of course, if we move forward a few thousand years, movement, if you will, or animation, was translated on the stage. You think about Greek theater. Greek theater is very organized, and it was used not only for entertainment, but also as a way for communication. And there was a lot of meaning behind the movement and the way the different actors or players moved across the screen. Of course, if we now go forward to, the past 100 years, animation of movement became really an important part of entertainment. You think about the way cartoons moved on the screen. And this was only within the past, 100 years or so did animation, modern animation, if you will, become pretty prevalent. And of course, if we move forward to modern days, animation is a really important part of design, not only on TV, animations become much more sophisticated than what we saw 100 years ago. But also animation and movement is used a lot in user interface design on the internet and in the apps that we use on our smart devices. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So today we're talking about designing with animation, and primarily I'm focusing on designing with animation as it relates to e-learning or learning content. But before I tell you a little bit more about what we're going to talk about, I do want to talk about a few things that we're not talking about. All right. So first thing we're not talking about is, why shouldn't I be using these fun animations? PowerPoint and Storyline and Captivate has all sorts of interesting, fun animations that, although they're there, you should not be using them. So I'm not going to be talking about why you shouldn't be using those fun animations. We're going to be talking about, some other things, but don't use those ugly, fun, cheesy animations. Just don't use them. We're also not going to be talking about, hey, that was a fun slide transition. Should I put that in my next e-learning course? No, you shouldn't put that into your next e-learning course. Again, Storyline, PowerPoint, Captivate, and all those tools that you use to create great e-learning has a lot of fun, cheesy slide transitions. Should you be using them? Not all the time. Why don't these animated bean people help my learning content? I don't know, but I can tell you, don't use them. They don't help your learning content. And that's not what we're talking about today. We're not talking about animated bean people. They don't help your learning content. Don't use them. So what are we talking about today? And as this slide transition occurs, I will tell you it's the last awful slide transition I will be using. But we're going to be talking about three things today. First off, we're going to be talking about how you can use animations to guide your learners' attention. I call those directional animations. We're also going to be talking about what I call transitional animations. How can you navigate a learner through changing content, get them from point A to point B, and help them understand how they got there through the use of movement or animation. We're also going to be talking about what is perhaps the most important type of animation, which is called instructional animations. How can you communicate meaning in learning content through the use of movement or animation? So let's start with directional animations. So directional animations are used to guide learners' attention across the screen. And to help help illustrate this, I want to conduct a quick experiment. So I'm going to play a video, or it's going to be animation, and there's going to be these red balls moving across the screen. And I want you to try and count how many red balls you see. All right, and if you can count them, raise your hand. All right, if you count how many balls there are. All right, so I'm giving you a second to prepare yourself. All right, we're going to start in 3, 2, 1. All right, so my question for you is, why didn't you raise your hand? Even if you didn't count all the red balls, why didn't you raise your hand? If you were watching that video, you are probably intently trying to count all of the red balls on the screen. But what you may not have noticed, and if you did notice it, good for you, but if you didn't notice, at the bottom of the screen during the animation, some text came on that says, if you're reading this, raise your hand, right? And the reason why I do this little experiment is to prove to you that in reality, although we think we're really smart individuals, we're more like a cat chasing a laser pointer than we are these really sophisticated beings that we like to think that we are. We're easily distracted. And animation and movement on the screen can be used to easily distract you. And that's what directional animations are about, not distracting your learner. Of course, I used that experiment to prove that you can guide your attention. But directional animations should be used to guide your learner's attention, to help them focus on the things that you want them to focus on. So you've probably seen this text before. Click the next button to continue. You may have seen it on the screen, or you may have heard it in the audio, and I'm sure anyone listening to this webinar has incorporated this text in one way or another in their e-learning courses. Click the next button to continue. After completing this slide, or after clicking on all these items, click the next button to continue. And the thing is I hate click the next button to continue. We tend to, and I'm guilty of this as well, is we put this on every single slide because we think our learners don't know how to proceed forward. And in a way, we treat them like they're stupid. We tell them this over and over and over again as if they're going to forget from one slide to the next that they have to click the next button to continue. And we can actually use animation to alleviate this, if you will. So here's an example of a slide here, and I might put some text here on the screen. I might accompany it with some audio that says, click the next button to continue. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not as elegant as I think it could be. So here's an example of a course, Safety in the Workplace, and let's say that we wanted the learner to click on that little arrow icon on the far right hand side of the screen. I could add some text that says click the next button to continue. But if you think about animation and what we want the learner to do, is there anything else that we could do to make this a little bit more elegant? Maybe something where it doesn't require us to add text on the screen, right? Think about that for a moment. What else could we do? Well, what if we animated that arrow? What if we had it pulse or move back and forth as a way to indicate to the learner what we want them to do? Now, as you observe this occurring on the screen, I want you to think about whether or not you've ever seen that before in real life. And you probably have. If you've ever used an iPad app or an iPhone app or any mobile app, you've probably seen an arrow, a pulsing arrow like this before to indicate to you that's how you move forward. If you click on that or scroll over it, that's how you move forward. And so by taking inspiration from things like apps that most people have learned or have used, we can indicate to the learner that's moving forward because this is something familiar to them. Now, of course, if the learner was to sit here for 10, 15 seconds, maybe then at that point we would bring in the text that says, click the next button or click that arrow to move forward. But this is a more elegant way to get the learner to do that without having to add additional text or audio to the screen. Here's another example of a slide. Let's say, we want the learner to click on every single one of these icons on the screen to get some information about Millennium Park in Chicago. Of course, I could add some text. It says click on each icon to learn more. But what else could we do? What else could we do to draw the learner's attention to those icons? Well, what if we animated the icons, right? There's something about the animation that immediately draws your eyes to those icons, and you want to click on them. There's something about the world around us, the way we've used apps and the way we've used the computers, that has taught us, if something's animating like this, we should click on it. We can do something with it. And this is a great way to visually indicate to the learner, hey, maybe I can do something there, right? And again, using animation to communicate that. Here's another example. Let's say on this slide, we wanted the learner to click on that thumbprint to initiate this course, right? Again, I could add some text that says click on the thumbprint when you're ready to continue, right? But let's watch this and I'll show you what I did here on this slide.
Welcome to this course presented to help you prevent identity theft. Click on the thumbprint when you are ready to begin.
All right, so you can see from that example, the animation, if you will, of the slide kind of masking out that vignette and focusing in on that thumbprint. Your eyes immediately went to the thumbprint. There's no doubt about it, and it clearly shows to the learner what they should be doing, even though it was reinforced with the audio. Their eyes or your eyes immediately go to that thumbprint, and you know what your call to action is at that point because of that subtle animation. All right, so those are directional animations. We're going to transition into transitional animations. No pun there intended. And transitional animations, like I said earlier, help guide the learner through changing content. How do you get the learner from point A to point B and help them understand where they were, where they're going, and how they got there? So transitional animations work something like this. Let's say we have a menu right here of 3 items that we want the learner to click on, and we want to introduce a 4th item to that learner. If I were to just do something like this and just show you that 4th item, the change that's happened on the screen happens so abruptly that your mind has to mentally comprehend what's changed on the screen. And although for most people that seems instantaneous, it does take an extra few milliseconds for your mind to process that. And those extra few milliseconds, I should say, that your mind is having to take to process that, that's time taken away, the learner's attention from the course. It's cognitive load, right? It takes a little bit more cognitive load for you to process that. So, is there any other way we could introduce this 4th menu item? We could add some text that says, hey, please take the new note of the new menu item, but that's not really very elegant if you think about it. So what else can we do? Well, if we think about these menu items in physical space, we could introduce that 4th item like you would in real space. So for example, if we have 3 items here and we want to introduce a 4th item, we could physically move those 3 items out of the way to make room for the 4th item. And that animation of those 3 items moving across the screen and the 4th one animating in actually communicates meaning to the learner that, hey, I'm introducing a 4th item to you. And that movement communicates that to them. You don't have to take the extra time to think about, hey, what changed on the screen compared to where I was before and where I am at now. You don't have to process that. I'm doing that for you through the use of the animation. So transitional animations, like I've said, are all about getting you from point A to point B and communicating how you got there so that you don't have to figure it out on your own. Here's another example. Let's say we have some sticky notes that we want to visually organize on the screen. If I were to do something like this, and all of a sudden, just snap and they're all in this, the sticky notes are all in a different location. Again, your mind might have to take some additional energy, expend some additional time and energy to process, hey, what's changed on the screen? How did those items move around? And that's especially true if say those sticky notes actually had content on it. If they actually had something written on it, it's going to take even longer to figure out, hey, where did that sticky note move to? And how is it grouped with the other items? And what does that mean? So again, if we think about animations in the way things move in physical space, what else could we do to communicate that we've reorganized these sticky notes and there's meaning behind that organization? Well, if we go back here to our sticky notes scattered all over the screen, well, what if we move these sticky notes in physical space, right? They move across the screen and reorganize visually on the screen through actual movement. That creates meaning for you as the observer. You get to see, oh, hey, this is where I was, this is where I'm going, and this is where I'm at, and you understand how you got there. Again, reducing the cognitive load on the learner to process that on their own. This next slide, this is an example of a slide that I use in a separate presentation I give on user interface design. And in this presentation, I explain that e-learning courses are built in layers, right? And I show this, and I after I talk about what's on the screen, I go to this slide where I say, oh, there's an interface layer, there's a content layer, and there's a background layer. But one of the things that I found about this particular presentation is that my audience was having a hard time understanding the difference between this slide and how they correlated to one another, right? So what's happening here is these three images you see on the screen are essentially layered versions of of that computer. And people are having a hard time understanding that those layers were expanded. So I ultimately ended up redesigning this slide to actually visually represent those different layers expanding from the computer. And I'll show you what this looks like now. So this is what it looks like now. We say, e-learning courses are built in layers. And then this animation expands those three items out from the computer, and that actually provides meaning to you. If you didn't know what these three items were, you now have a better understanding of how you got here from where we started, which was here. So I'll do that one more time. They expand out. That animation, that movement, that transitional animation provides meaning to you, explains where you were at point A and now at point B and how you got there. Here's another example. This is from a free template that I had created many, many years ago. And you can download this for free off of the Articulate eLearning Heroes community. And it's one of the more popular templates that's out there. And one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is, why is this template so popular? Because from a graphic design perspective, there's not a lot happening here. You have some text, you have three colors, and it's pretty much just boxes on the screen. It's nothing too remarkable. But what I realized is the reason that this template has been so popular is not because of the graphic design, because the graphic design isn't remarkable, but because of the animations I used in this template. And so as I play this, I want you to notice how each screen constructs itself and then deconstructs itself as it transitions from one slide to another. So I'll go ahead and play this. So you can see how that opening slide, disassembled, and this new slide for the learning objectives is reassembling. And these transitions, this is providing a better sense of meaning and understanding about where you were, where you're at now, and how you got there. Here's another one. This is another template I created, and same basic principle here. The slides build in and then they build out as they transition from one screen to another. I'll go ahead and play this. So here's the opening screen. This is the menu, and if I click on the values menu item, notice how the main menu deconstructs and the values screen animates in. Again, transitioning you, the learner, from point A to point B, reducing that cognitive load. Here's another example. This is another template I've created. You can download this from the eLearning Uncovered blog or the Articulate eLearning Heroes community. And on this one, I don't want you to worry about the content, but I want you to notice how the transition from one menu to another occurs. So in this example, there's a series of menus, if you will, that the learner has to move through before they start this course. And in this one, they enter their name, they select a character, and then they select a scenario. And I want you to notice how we transition from each menu. And think of this in terms of an app. If you ever download a new app and you have to register for it or sign up for it, if you enter your name and then it'll transition to the next section or the next form, and then it'll transition to the next one. That was my inspiration for this, so I want you to notice that as I play this. Alright, so everything animates in. If I click that next arrow, everything transitions to this first field where we enter our name, enter the name, and then it's going to animate out, and the next one's going to animate in. Alright, where we select our character, and we move on forward to select the scenario. So same basic principle here, but that transitioning is helping mentally guide the learner from one area to another, so that they don't have to take the time to mentally process, hey, something changed on the screen. They're actually seeing it change right in front of their eyes. All right. Here's another example. This was another template that I created that you can download from the Articulate eLearning Heroes community. And in this one, if you notice, there's that yellow button in the top left corner. And this is supposed to be a pull-down menu. And when the learner clicks on this, this menu comes down from the screen. And it looks something like this. And if I were to just make it do that, if I were to just make it appear, the learner may not understand, hey, that was a pull-down menu, and where did it come from? So I want you to notice how the animation actually communicates. This is a pull-down menu, just through the use of the animation and the movement. So you see how that comes down. If I click, it goes back away, it kind of goes back up, and it's moving in physical space. You have a sense of where it goes. When it goes away, it actually lives somewhere, and then it comes down from the top of the screen. And even notice the subtle, when it comes down, the blurring in the background blurs out, so your focus is on the menu versus the content. All right. Here's another example. This one is from a course that I built the year before last, or last year, I believe, on how to cook a turkey. And I use this as an example. And in this one, there's these series of pop-up windows or pop-up menus. And it's funny how we talk about pop-up windows, but rarely do we have our pop-up windows pop up. They kind of just appear on the screen without having any sense of where it came from, right? So I want you to notice, again, just like the pull-down menu, how these pop-up windows literally pop up in physical space and giving you a sense of where you're at in the course. So I'll go ahead and play this. So notice when the mouse clicks on the little extra button, the pop-up window pops up, and then if I click on the X to close it, it pops down. Again, physical space. And again, the background blurs out ever so slightly, giving a sense of where you're at and where you came from to communicate what's happening here. All right. So those were transitional animations. The last one I'm going to talk about, which I think is the most important one, if you're going to take away anything from this presentation, are instructional animations. Instructional animations are a great way, if you use them properly, you can communicate meaning. You can give meaning to what might otherwise be meaningless content, or content that you'd have to explain with additional words on the screen or additional words in your audio narration. So, instructional animations are all about nonverbal communication. How can you communicate something without using extra words, right? And I oftentimes like to think of it as a menu without images, right? I'll be the first one to admit that I like to visually see what it is I'm ordering. I like to see what the food looks like so I can have an idea of what it is I'm going to eat, right? And that's, I guess, in a way, a nonverbal communication. I'm not having to use words to understand what it is that I'm ordering. And it sounds really sad and stupid, but it's true. We like to see what we're going to eat. And instructional animations, the nonverbal communication component of instructional animations, is all about showing your learners what it is you're trying to say. So if I say something like, the moon orbits the Earth, I say the moon orbits the Earth, you have an idea in your head of what that means. You might visualize the moon orbiting the Earth. You might visualize it literally, or you might in some way create your own little animation in your mind about what this means. You have an idea of what that means. But what if you didn't know what that means, the moon orbits the Earth? How would you have to explain that? Well, you might do something like this, where you show the Earth and the moon, right? And then to visualize, the movement, I might add a dotted line to say, hey, the moon orbits the Earth. But, what else can we do? Well, what if I actually showed the moon orbiting the Earth using animations to help illustrate the meaning behind that? So what if I actually made the moon orbit the Earth? That's what instructional animations are all about. Showing your learners what it is you're trying to say. Actually showing it to them. And this is an example of that. I'm showing you what I mean when I say the moon orbits the Earth. So instructional animations are all about, when you explain something to your learners or an audience or whoever it is, each person in your audience or each of your learners has a different idea in their head about what it is that you're trying to say and the meaning behind that. And instructional animations are all about, rather than, explaining it to your learners and having your learners be responsible for having an idea of what it is. It's about taking that out of their mind and putting it on the screen and showing them what it is you mean so that they don't have to comprehend it for themselves. You can show them, and now everybody has a consistent idea of what it is you're talking about. That's what instructional animations are about. Now, there are two different types of instructional animations. You have conceptual instructional animations and technical instructional animations. Conceptual instructional animations explain some conceptual idea, something that may not be true to life. And technical animations actually physically show something that might be real or physical or technical, something that is real to life. And I'll show you examples of both. So I'm going to show you this example from a course that we created on steel reinforced concrete. And it's about how steel reinforces concrete, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I'll go ahead and show this and let it explain itself.
Steel reinforced concrete succeeds reliably as a unified system because its material components, concrete and reinforcing steel, work so harmoniously to support each other. Concrete provides strength under compression, while reinforcing steel provides inner strength under tension. Compression and tension are opposing forces, basically push and pull. With no reinforcement, concrete handles compression well, but over time, tension forces can compromise concrete's strength. Steel reinforcement is added to concrete because it handles tension well. Using them together is a remarkably efficient use of two of the world's most common and economical building materials, producing a sustainable result.
All right, so in that example, we used animations to physically show something that you may not be able to demonstrate otherwise. That, steel reinforces concrete and helps it, be more flexible and allows it to bend rather than collapse under the pressure that's placed upon it. And that's something you would not be able to show with pictures. Probably wouldn't be able to show with pictures. And probably wouldn't have a lot of meaning if it was just words. So we showed an animation to help explain that. And even this image alone that you see here, even if we put this image here, some people may not be able to understand that. But the animation showing it actually bending or failing under the pressure gives it meaning that wouldn't be there otherwise. So here's another example. This is a conceptual animation on identity theft. I'll go ahead and play this and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Whether you realize it or not, identity theft is a major concern both here in the U.S. and globally. According to the Federal Trade Commission, identity theft was the #1 fraud complaint during the calendar year 2008 and cost Americans nearly $1.52 billion in 2012. Even more startling, a 2009 study released by Javelin Strategy and Research found that 43% of all identity thefts were committed by someone the victim knows. This means anyone has the potential to be an identity thief.
All right, I'll go ahead and stop that there. So in that example, I wasn't explaining anything technical, but I was telling a visual story through the use of the animations. And the inspiration from that came from like a Dateline MSNBC special, right? Where you see the image of the FTC, and then of course you have some, generic documents animated in, and then you zoom in a fun fact that highlights it. That's something you might see on a news program. And by explaining that information visually on the screen, the learner, you as the learner or the audience member, is going to be a little bit more captivated by it, even though the animation doesn't serve any other purpose than just to explain something conceptually. Here's another example. This one's a little bit a different example of a conceptual animation. This one I like a lot. This one was about this form that we did for the Red Cross. This form had to be filled out every single day by 5 p.m. And anything that got added to the form after 5 p.m. actually went on the next day's form. And this is what the content looked like originally for the client. And we ultimately redesigned it. Now, before I play this, I will mention it is a couple years old, so it does look a little bit dated compared to today's design aesthetics, but it still stands strong as a good example of conceptual animations. So I'll go ahead and play this.
After the first Form 5266 is submitted, subsequent forms should be completed daily until there is minimal activity. The form should capture all activity up until the close of business, which is 5 o'clock p.m. local time. For example, a health services contact made at 4:45 p.m. would go on that day's Form 5266. However, a contact made at 6 o'clock p.m. would go on the next day's form.
All right. So in that example, as you can see, we were talking about how often the form needs to be filled out and by what time. And so rather than just having a bunch of bullet points on the screen, we physically showed this. We showed a calendar and we said, each day the form 5266 has to be filled out. And then we zoomed in and showed a representation of what a day meant and the deadline. And again, visually explaining this. And you might be able to understand this information with the bullet points, right? But it's not going to be as engaging or memorable. This is something you might remember otherwise. All right, here's another example. This is one I did on inventory shortage, about how a retail environment calculates inventory shortage. The information you need to know, and this is actually the information that was originally provided to the learner in the form of all these bullet points. You don't need to read through this, but know that it's about how does a store calculate inventory shortage. When somebody steals something, how's that counted for financially in the retail environment? So I'll go ahead and play how we transform these bullet points into something more visual and using animations to explain this concept.
So how do we figure out a store's inventory shortage? It is a simple concept to understand. We just need to know how the company values its merchandise. It goes without saying that all of the merchandise in our store has value. The value represents the retail dollar amount at which the company owns the merchandise. For example, this t-shirt has a ticketed retail price of $30, so the company owns this shirt at $30. If a store has 10 of these t-shirts, then the company owns these shirts for a total of $300. This same concept applies to clearance merchandise as well. Whatever the retail price is of the merchandise, that's the price the company owns it at. So how does this apply to inventory shortage? Going back to our t-shirt example, if our inventory system states that a store should have 10 t-shirts at $30 a piece, but we find that 3 of them are missing, we have an inventory shortage of $90.
All right, so you can see in that example, we explained the concept of inventory shortage by showing a visual representation of shirts on the screen, and those animations of things coming in and out of the screen helps create a visual story about what is inventory shortage, something that's a little bit more engaging than bullet points. All right, this last example I'm going to show you is on inventory tags. This was another retail example about inventory, and this is what the content originally looked like. And the important thing for you to know as you observe this is that these inventory tags, you may have seen them in a retail environment before when you've been shopping, but these inventory tags during a store's inventory get placed on every single fixture, and they have to be placed in a specific order, and that order is front to back, left to right, and they snake through the department, right? And again, these bullet points explain that, and that might be clear for some people, but I don't know if it actually prepares somebody to actually go do this in their, real life work environment. And so we visually showed what does it mean to place these inventory tags from front to back, left to right. I'll go ahead and let you watch the example to see what I mean.
Area tickets should be placed in numerical order, from front to back and left to right, snaking through the department. For example, in this department of the store, area ticket placement would start here and continue through the department until reaching the end. The wall should be tagged either before or after the department fixtures. Just be sure to be consistent from one department to another. In this example, the wall is tagged after the department fixtures.
All right, so you can see that example again. We took the concept of placing those inventory tags and saying that they have to be placed front to back, left to right, and actually showed what does that mean to be placed from front to back, left to right. And after watching this, somebody might be much more prepared to go do this and execute this process in their work environment than they would be otherwise if they were to just read those bullet points. And the nice thing about this example is that it lends itself to all sorts of other interactive components that you can incorporate into your course. For example, once I demonstrate this through the use of the animations, later on in the course, I could create a drag and drop interaction or a quiz question where the learner actually has to, do this in a simulated environment where they have to click and drag these tags in that particular order. And it probably would have never occurred to us otherwise if we hadn't presented the information in this way. So those are the 3 types of animations I typically use in my e-learning content. Directional animations to help guide the learner's attention, to focus their attention on a certain area of the screen. Transitional animations to help guide the learner through changing content. and explaining, from point A to point B and helping them understand how they got there. And then finally, most importantly, instructional animations. How can you explain concepts or ideas through the use of animations? How do you provide meaning to content that might otherwise be meaningless through the use of animations, and allows you to reduce the amount of words or audio you have in your course? So what I'm going to close out with is by saying that when we think about the e-learning development process, we usually think of it as it starting with instructional design. And instructional design is obviously really important. A course is nothing without good content, good instructional content. And we also have graphic design and, of course, the interface design. But one thing I would challenge you all to do is to make time for animation design. Animation design can really help support your instructional design. It can support and enhance your graphic design, and of course it can support your interface design and make it a course that's easier to use. So don't think of e-learning design as just being instructional design or graphic design. Figure out ways to incorporate animation design into your content as well. And then the last thing I'll close with are 3 simple rules for designing with animation. So rule number 1 is use animations to help learners see what you're saying. All right? And that's the most important thing, to help learners see what you're saying. You can use animations to reduce the amount of wording you have on the screen, or the amount that you have to explain in audio content. If you use really well-designed animations, you can provide meaning to content that might otherwise be meaningless. So help learners see what you're saying through the use of animations. Use animations with purpose and intention, or intent. If you incorporate an animation and you can't explain why you're doing that, you probably shouldn't incorporate the animation. Animation should always be used with some intent in mind, whether it's to help focus the learner's attention, or whether you're helping transition the learner through complicated content, or you're trying to explain some concept. Use animations with purpose. And then finally, when in doubt, fade in and out. There's a lot of animations available to us. Doesn't mean we should use them all. So when in doubt, if you don't know what other animation to use, just fade in and out. That is my number 1 bit of advice. So thank you. That is designing with animations. Designing with animation for e-learning content. Thank you for coming.
Hey, did you like that video? Make sure to check out some of our other great content at elearninguncovered.com.